In today's video, we're discussing all the latest NHL trade and free agent rumors regarding the Calgary Flames, Edmonton Oilers, Boston Bruins, Pittsburgh Penguins, Chicago Blackhawks, and the Buffalo Sabres. We're going to get all that in coming up next. Welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. So as I mentioned, today we have a little bit of a roundup of different rumors around the NHL, including some trade rumors and some free agent talk amongst the guys that are still remaining unsigned. Of course, some of these teams are facing a bit of a salary cap crunch and how they might go about dealing with it here. So let's first get started with a couple minor tidbits, including the Calgary Flames, who apparently, according to Jim Matheson, are interested in signing unrestricted free agent defenseman Alex Petrovic, who was recently here with the Oilers, of course, before that with the Florida Panthers. Apparently, the Flames are interested in his services, but I would think that likely would require them to be moving out a defenseman, which we've already talked about before. They're facing a little bit of a salary cap crunch themselves, like a lot of teams around the league, because of the lack of increase that we saw this year. They still have to sign Matthew Tkachuk, which is going to be proved to be quite costly. And of course, a lot of the rumors that we've discussed in the past to handle that include trading guys like Michael Frolik or possibly TJ Brody. But without trading a defenseman, I'm not sure that they really make a lot of sense for them to sign Petrovic. If they do end up trading another defenseman to satisfy their cap situation, I could see them being interested maybe on a short-term one-year contract to see how things work out with Alex Petrovic. But right now he's looking for work, and the only team that he's been linked to so far is the Flames, but I do suspect that that's likely will be pending other moves to happen in order to get a signing. Depending on what else happens with the Flames and how long it takes for them to make moves and get Tkachuk signed, I could see them maybe inviting him to training camp on a professional tryout if he's not already signed, which will allow them to buy more time to get things figured out. Now, jumping over to the provincial rival in Edmonton, I just want to touch on the fact that apparently there's been interest in them adding a number 3 center, and they're looking a lot at unrestricted free agent center Derek Brassard. There had been some talk as well about maybe Brian Boyle. Both of them are still looking for work, and here we are into August. So I do think that as time goes on here, there's likely going to be less options for a lot of these players that are unsigned, likely not going to be getting the type of money that they were originally hoping for. It was reported that Derek Brassard was looking for a contract of around $4 million, but he was willing to accept a shorter term 1 or 2 year contract. But I think it's fair to say at this point in the offseason, Derek Brassard's not getting $4 million from anybody. I'm not really sure that he's worth that kind of money based on his recent performance. Really, ever since he got to Ottawa, things kind of started to go downhill. Went to Pittsburgh, didn't really fit in, and bounced around a little bit after that. And he's done okay, but he's certainly not at the level that he used to be. I do think he's going to end up signing for much cheaper than that, should he want to continue playing in the NHL. And obviously, the Edmonton Oilers are not in a position where they could really afford to pay him that kind of money anyway. Not that it would be justified anyhow, but there apparently is interest in the player. Just a matter of seeing if they can come to terms on a much cheaper contract than what was being reported, at least, that he was looking for. So I guess we'll see, but keep an eye on the Oilers. They obviously do have some other moves that they're likely going to make. Probably nothing too significant, but adding a player like him would be helpful. Now, the Athletic's Josh Yeo, who covers the Pittsburgh Penguins, had a recent article on the Pittsburgh Penguins situation and the fact that they are interested in signing restricted free agent defenseman Marcus Pettersson to a longer-term contract. They've really been quite pleased with the defenseman after acquiring him from the Anaheim Ducks earlier last season in exchange for Daniel Sprong. He did seem to be a pretty good fit there, and so overall the Penguins were quite pleased with him. They see him as being a pretty decent part of the Blue Line's future, and they'd like to be able to sign him longer term, but regardless of what they sign him to, he needs a new contract for the coming year, as he's currently an RFA, and they only have $150K in salary cap space remaining after the other moves they've made. And analyzing their roster, there's not really a whole lot they can do, putting players in the minors or whatnot, so they do likely need to make a trade. General Manager Jim Rutherford did acknowledge the fact that both sides were mutually interested in doing a longer term deal, but he has to find the salary cap space to get it done. So of course, if you take a look around the team and the likely moves that they're going to make, the article suggests guys like Nick Bukestad, Brian Rust, and Jack Johnson are the most likely candidates to be traded. Of course, we almost saw a deal with Jack Johnson earlier in the summer, along with Phil Kessel going to Minnesota, which never happened because of Phil Kessel's no trade clause and the fact that he declined to make that trade. Of course, Kessel's already been since moved to Arizona. I do think that the Penguins would like to trade Johnson, and it's not going to be easy to do. That contract is not the best. I've been critical of it ever since they signed it. Not so much the money, but the longer term that they gave him. I wasn't really a fan of it, and I don't really think that he had a strong season for the Penguins last year. Although based on my experience talking to Pens fans in the comment section on this channel and various videos, there does seem to be a bit of a mixed reaction, I feel, on Johnson. But anyways, let me know what you think. Is Jack Johnson deserving of that contract, or should they really look to trade him if they can? Or is it more realistic and likely that we see a trade involving like a Nick Bukestad or a Brian Rust, Bukestad and Rust are both kind of players that can be productive and can be, key pieces of the roster, but at the same time prove to be inconsistent at times. I think Bukestad would probably be preferable to be traded than Rust. Obviously, Rust has been there longer. They're more familiar with him, and even though he might not be the most consistent at times, I do think they like what he brings longer term than what they got in Bukestad. He's only been there since last year. After that trade with the Florida Panthers, which also brought them Jared McCann, but between the two, McCann certainly fit in better with the roster here than Bukestad, and they've made a fair bit of other moves throughout this offseason. So it's certainly going to be a fairly new-look Penguins team come this fall, and there likely could be another piece or two that's traded out here to free up the necessary space to sign Pettersson. Fortunately, I don't think the Pettersson contract's going to command too much money, so they don't need to make a ton of space, but they're also going to want to have some flexibility for in-season moves as well. So it'll be interesting to see what Jim Rutherford decides to do here, but between now and training camp, I do expect them to move out a player, get Pettersson signed, and get their roster set for the coming year. So let me know what you think is the most logical, likely move that makes sense for the Penguins to do to get Pettersson signed and give themselves a little bit of flexibility with the salary cap. I've come across multiple articles discussing the Boston Bruins salary cap situation, including NBC Sports and CLNS, talking about what moves they should make and what Don Sweeney should do in order to become salary cap compliant, as they need to get their defensemen Charlie McAvoy and Brandon Carlo under contract. Both restricted free agent defensemen remain unsigned, and the Boston Bruins do need to prepare for the fact that they could end up with one or both of them possibly not being in training camp. A recent interview with Cam Neely revealed the fact that they are working on a contingency plan in case they're not signed to start the season. Obviously, that will impact their roster, impacts their team, and it could impact their salary cap situation even more, as we've seen last year with William Nylander and the Maple Leafs. If the player holds out beyond the start of the year, once they are signed, that first year of the contract is prorated, and their cap hit for year one does, become inflated and impact the salary cap even more in the short term. So obviously, getting them signed before training camp is that much more important. But like a lot of these other RFAs, they're kind of waiting for the first dominoes to fall. They're kind of waiting for the market to be set. And so far, for most of these players, that has not happened as of yet. And now we're into August, and there's not really any incentive on either side to hurry up and get a deal done. So it's debatable that we'll really see much of any movement, I think, in that market over the next few weeks as we get closer to training camp. There's at least a little bit more of an incentive from the team's perspective, and even for the players' perspective as well. The team's not going to want the cap hit to be higher for year one. The player's not going to want to miss training camp, and we very well could see a rash of contracts signed as training camps begin underway. Both of these articles suggest trading defenseman Kevin Miller. They seem to feel he's expendable. His contract's not overly big. He's battled some injuries, and the blue line can certainly carry on without him. They do discuss the possibility of moving Torrey Krug as well, but both articles seem to suggest, and I would agree, that it's probably not the greatest idea here. He does drive a lot of offense from that back end. The only concern is he's heading into the final year of his contract. He's going to be looking for a big raise, as really would come to expect here, but at the same time, can they afford that longer term? They need to figure out their longer term plan and see if he's going to be in the mix longer term or somebody else has to go. But either way, his next contract's going to be coming real soon, and he's going to prove to be, costly to keep around. And of course, there's also defenseman John Moore, who they signed to a fairly extensive contract in last year's free agency. Didn't have the greatest year, ended up being a scratch in the playoffs, and then ended up being injured as well, and he likely will not be starting the year, so they will be able to get some cap flexibility on a short-term basis by placing him on long-term injury reserve when the season gets underway, so that'll kind of alleviate a little bit of the pressure on the cap as well. Both these articles also reference the possibility of trading forward David Krejci, but of course the only problem with that, as much as his salary cap hit is significant and would make things a lot easier to make other moves, he certainly had a resurgence last year after some period of time of not performing at the level that he was expected to. Krejci certainly bounced back last year, had a solid year, and was very important in their deep run to the Stanley Cup Finals. And there's really nobody else on the roster that's really in a situation to step up and take over that number 2 center spot. So they would really weaken the team by not having him there. And really, at the same time, though, if he's not able to continue the pace that he played at last year, it might prove to be, not a great idea either. So either way, and trading Krejci, I don't think it's going to be simple. And at the same time, replacing him is not going to be simple. You're likely not going to swap him out for anybody else who's going to come back with a cheaper contract and do the same job or better. So trading him really doesn't make a lot of sense either. I think the more likely scenario for Boston is that we likely see more go on LTIR at the beginning of the year. Maybe trade Miller. Moving that Backes contract is going to prove to be very, very difficult. Obviously, that would be a tremendous help if they could move David Backes. But both of these articles, again, reference the fact that it's likely going to be impossible. And I'll never say never. We've seen some other bad contracts and assets swapped over this offseason, but there's really not a lot of deals left that would make sense, I don't think at least, for the Bruins where they could alleviate themselves of that contract. Let me know what you think. What is the best move here for the Bruins to become cap compliant? Is it going to be as simple as maybe trading Miller, putting more in long-term injury reserve to start the year, getting the other guys signed, and then kind of go from there? I really don't see them trading guys like Krejci or Krug in the short term, but I think the Bruins are still in a win-now mode after coming off a Stanley Cup Finals appearance. They're going to be doing their best to go all in and go for it again for the coming season. Now, the Buffalo Sabres are going to be given another buyout window now that all of their RFA cases are settled and signed. There's some talk around the NHL that they very well might be buying out forward Vladimir Sobotka, who's going to be entering the final year of his contract. Now, with the recent signings that the Sabres have made, they find themselves over the salary cap, not by a whole lot. It's only around $1 million. But the Sabres do need to find a way to free up some space, and this might be a simple and easy way to do it without making a bigger move. We've discussed them possibly trading Rasmus Ristolainen in the past. Of course, it's hard to say if they're going to do that or not. A move like this could get them cap compliant and not force them to make any more significant trades. Buying out Sobotka in the final year of his contract would save $2 million for the coming year, so that would get them under the cap and be cap compliant before the start of the season. And of course, Sobotka never really worked out there. Most of the pieces that they got in that O'Reilly trade really, unfortunately for them, have not turned out to be the greatest so far. At least we'll see if Tage Thompson can progress and become a player for them down the road, but otherwise that trade so far is heavily favored in the form for the Blues here. The pieces going back to Buffalo did not really work out, and Sobotka likely is going to be gone after this season if he's not bought out. Even though Sabres writers have indicated Jason Botterill's not really much of a fan of buying players out like this, it is likely that this could happen. So don't be surprised in the next few days when this window opens that Sobotka is announced to be bought out of the final year of his contract, freeing up the space for them to become cap compliant. Next up, I want to take a look at the Chicago Blackhawks and forward Brendan Perlini, who appear to be about $500,000 apart in contract negotiations. Apparently, he's looking for around $1.5 million, which seems reasonable based on his recent play and production. And the Hawks are offering around $1 million, so it's certainly going to be debatable here to see if they can bridge that gap and get it closed here, get a contract in place before training camp gets underway. Now, Perlini is represented by Darren Ferris, who's also the agent for Mitch Marner, who has a reputation for driving a very hard bargain. So we'll see how negotiations go. He's been a player that's also been mentioned before in trade rumors. Not entirely 100% convinced yet that he's going to sign or remain with the Blackhawks. I would not be shocked to see them find a way to move him to another team. It is possible that they very well might end up allowing his agent to speak to other teams to find a deal if things get to that point, but there's certainly no pressure, as I mentioned, on either side right now to get a deal done. It's quite likely they could find a way to kind of bridge the gap and get a contract closed here before training camp. But listening to recent interviews talking about the contract from Stan Bowman and even the player himself, they don't seem to be too concerned at this point. There's still plenty of time to hammer out a deal. We'll see if they can get that done before training camp or if he ends up getting moved. That is all your latest rumor roundup regarding free agent talk and trade talk here for today. Of course, as always, want to know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section. Let me know what moves you think we're going to see throughout the remainder of the offseason, and we'll continue the conversation in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.